Seventh graders hate going to school because of this. Why? You have to, because it looks like what?
Well, they feel like doofuses at times, but they feel inferior to the kids that can do it, and it involves a lot of different things in order to be able to use a combination lock. Certainly it involves directionality, left, right, left. It also involves that you always have to go past the second digit. So you go to the first digit, and if the second digit is 3, you have to go past it one time and then go to it again. And very often, a lot of students, at least that I've taught, will mess that up, and they'll fail to do that again. And also, you've got to be able to see the numbers on the dial. You've got to be able to read it.
You'll see those little lines and know what they mean.
That's right. And you've got to line it up exactly. That's another thing. For somebody that has motor planning difficulty, you've got to get it pretty doggone close to that 3, because if it's not, if it's off by just a little bit, it won't work. And you've got to do that 3 times for 3 numbers.
Okay, besides all that coordinates that Peter's talking about, we also, as a teacher, have to ask ourselves questions. We have to say, will this child learn best by my demonstrating it? Will this child be able to learn it by my talking him through it? Or will he learn best by hearing the instructions twice? Or would written instructions help? With most of our population, it would not help at all. Do we need to really develop strategies to help distinguish the left side from the right side? For example, go purple, have a little piece of purple here, and go purple to 5, the other way to 10, purple to 7, and pull. That would work for a lot of people, but not for everybody. What else would work?
Probably the most common occasion where we're going to see somebody having trouble with this, if they were able to do it one time but they're having trouble a second time, is when it's actually already on the locker. And so but that's a very uncomfortable position to be trying to learn a new skill in. So a better teaching position would be to have it flat on your desk in front of you and just have it locking nothing, but just practicing the skill of turning the dial, because that is the skill at hand. The skill is not pulling it yet. We're still working on the dialing skill.
Now, we found at the high school that we could practice in isolation, but when they needed to transfer it onto the locker itself, they began to forget everything that had been practiced in isolation. So one of the things that I did was to take a magic marker in several different colors and draw an arrow to the right, draw an arrow to the left, draw another arrow to the right, so that they could visually have a reminder of where they began turning the locks to.
Yeah.
That seemed to help.
Sally, I was just going to add to that this is really, there's so many memory components involved in what seems to us like a simple task. And I was going to talk about isolating just the sounds that go with the numbers themselves and add a rhythm to it, because that's part of what we use is a rhythm, 36, 36, 2, 36, 35, 2. And that, isolate that and then combine it to one.
Good.
It's interesting, in terms of teen planning, we discovered one of our students had a real hard time with this, and what she was doing was carrying all of her books in her backpack all day long, and it was very heavy. She was having a really hard time with it, so it involved the OT department. We all got together and started talking about a plan, and she was so anxious about working this lock that we discovered if we told all, or talked as a group and said that this child will be expected to be late every day for maybe 4 or 5 days while she gets used to learning how to operate this lock, that she'll have a lot less anxiety. So when everybody was working together, all the different disciplines to help her with this thing, we discovered that it was mostly the anxiety about being late that was making it hard for her to operate the lock.
One of the things that we do in occupational therapy is work with the kids before they make the transition from the intermediate level up to junior high, and have them practice doing a combination in all of those different sequencing things that we've been describing, working with the lock alone and then on the locker, and for some kids sometimes meeting them at the time they would go for their lockers, and the OT is right there with them side by side to have them work the lock, and then they go on to the next class. And sometimes just having that extra support is what they need.
How do you decide whether to color code something, or decide certain kinds of groupings or certain kinds of patterns? What forces your hand on that?
The visual learner would benefit from color coding more so than an auditory learner. But you have to be careful because some visual learners are distracted by the colors. So you have to really be careful in who you plan to use which strategies with. And sometimes you think you have it all figured out, and then you go to use it with the students, and it still doesn't work. So then you have to like rethink your ideas about the students as well as your ideas about the task.
With this sheet, these are typical problems that we see in a day at lab school. Let's take the first row. How come this student keeps getting 13?
I guess when I see the same answer appearing 5 times, it would seem like they're either overgeneralizing a rule or there's a sign discrimination problem.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have the visual discrimination to see the difference between an addition sign, a multiplication sign,
And
or they don't look.
Right, and sometimes also what happens is that some students, what they'll do is they'll answer one question, and then in the following questions, they'll just be in this zone, and that will be their answer.
That is true, and particularly if it starts with 14 each time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now let's go to the second row. Why do you think this 5 minus 0 is a problem? 0 means nothing, and the children say if it means nothing, I don't understand why it exists. What is about 0? Very, very abstract.
Or Sally, he could have learned that 0 times anything is 0, and so instead of realizing that that's a subtraction problem, he's got that fact and he's just overgeneralized.
Tell me what's wrong with that last problem on second row, 49 plus 25.
When he added up the 9 and the 15, he got 14, which is correct. But when he wrote the number, he reversed it.
Right, you wrote the wrong part.
Carried over, or he regrouped with the 4 instead of the 1. And so his addition is perfectly correct, but he just keeps adding the wrong number.
And it's one of the reasons why we always need to say to the child, tell me what you did here. Because very often there's a logic, and a good logic, and we tend to just see it as wrong.
He got the correct sequence, but he got the procedure reversed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just reverse the numbers.
All right, tell me what happened in the fourth row.
He gave up.
What else?
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed, what else?
And also the 9 made it the
But in the fourth row, none of the problems were answered except one. And very often they skip or omit paragraphs, sentences, or problems. They just don't see it, they don't track left to right and keep it in their eye view. All right, the next one, 43,268 divided by 28. Why is that so tough? So first you had to go in there and estimate.
Right, right. You have to line everything up, spatial orientation, spatial organization. They need graph paper here.
Yeah, to keep your line straight.
And yeah, that often happens though, that you get so many problems crammed onto one piece of paper, you have no space to work it out, everything starts to get overlapped, and now they've covered up part of another problem.
You've got to keep the alignment, or the whole thing's wrong.
I have to stay focused. Because it's a long
That's a
multi-step process, and it
is
get lost any step of the way.
What do we need to know in order to be able to do long division? What would be involved in a task analysis?
Okay, visual perception and visual discrimination are important because you have to see, process, and interpret numbers and symbols correctly. And you need fine motor skills to write numbers and symbols legibly. Receptive language skills, you have to understand math vocabulary. And the understanding of math concepts are critical. You have to understand place value, subtraction, multiplication, division, the reciprocal relationship between multiplication and division. Sequencing is important. You have to have procedural knowledge and temporal concepts. You have to know beginning, middle, ending in the process.
you have to understand the space on the paper. You need to say which is dividend and which is divisor, and you should know how to align the numbers by place value. And you need sustained attention, how to control your impulsivity, and working memory is needed. Data cognition, you have to self-monitor yourself. Am I doing all right? You need to check and keep going. You need a whole lot of comprehensive skills.
Right. Jude, what happens when we add the word problem to it?
So when we add the language to it, just as we talked about earlier today, when we add the language to it, although we mean to be helping, it makes it that much more complicated, it's that much more stimuli, and very often then attending to one piece, they can't attend to the other.
And then a lot of kids that seem to be doing well in math, all of a sudden they hit Frank earned $12, Sarah earned 6, Peter earned 9, who earned the most money? How much more did Frank earn than Sarah?
And then they have to translate that into numbers in some way, and that's a very, those moving to the symbols is a very difficult process, and make much more abstract maybe than we realize.
And those that have language-based learning disabilities may be good at numbers, but not at that. Meredith, why do they have trouble with greater than and less than?
I think it's the directionality of the arrow.
Right.
You know, it's just an arrow in space. It goes one way or the other, but if you can't remember which is which, you're not going to get any of these correct.
And you would have had to really be secure in the more than, less than concept before you can learn this arrow to be successful, the symbol to be successful in using it. And you have to remember it, and it's not a symbol we use all the time.
And if you're rotating your symbols in space, you might as well forget it, because you could have an arrow going up and down instead of left and right. So it's a much more complicated process than it appears to be.
What about the fill in the blanks? The 3 plus 5 equal blank. The 3 plus 1 equal 8.
Again, this is a very major language issue. We see this when we do, sometimes when we do Mad Libs with kids. Other kids can really tell which part of speech. People don't realize that this is a math problem, but it's really a language problem to look for which part of speech. Is it a number that's asked for? Is it a letter that's written out? Is it a word? These are very difficult concepts for language for kids.